141. Okay, to better understand this topic, let's go over what we know about spirit force, or, in simpler terms, the will. Sir, will this be on the exam? No, I'm just covering it to help better explain the phenomenon behind a portal break. I sighed. What a boring class it was. Yes, I finally decided to attend a lecture. It had been weeks since I last showed up to any class. Yeah, I hate to admit it, but I had a problem. Before our first assigned mission, I took a day off just for the hell of it. Then, it became a habit. Before I knew it, I had skipped 45 mandatory classes, 32 optional ones, and more than 20 electives. It just couldn't go on like this. So today, I finally dragged myself back to the academy. And I was already regretting that decision in favor of sleeping the day off. Slouching in one of the back row seats, I rested my chin on my palm and looked out of the classroom window. The view outside was as dreamlike as it ever was on Ascent Isles. From up here, I could see countless second and third year cadets bustling in and out of Apex Tower, filling the streets of the Academy City. I could also see the Sky Gardens. Most of them were still lush, though patches of brown had begun creeping into the greenery as winter was slowly approaching, even though it was nearly April. Even the sea of clouds on which the Ascent Isles floated looked murky gray today. Right, it was monsoon season outside the Ascent Isles. Sometimes, I forgot how jarring it was, this stark contrast between the ecosystem inside and outside the Isles. A cold wind must have been sweeping through the streets outside as some cadets shivered, but inside the classroom, the air remained still, stale, even. I exhaled through my nose and turned my gaze back to the professor. Right now, I was sitting through one of the mandatory classes, a guide to the spirit realm's ecology and geography. It was Rexard Cronwell's lecture. With dark hair, light hazel eyes glinting with a hint of amusement, and almost boundless charisma, the man held the attention of every cadet in the room. Except mine. Why? Because I already knew most of what he was saying. Continue reading at my virtual library empire. After all, in my previous life, I had spent more hours than I'd care to admit delving into the game's lore and world background. Sure, I didn't know everything. And I had also forgotten many things. But I definitely knew whatever he was teaching. Spirit force is the foundation of all high-level combat. It is a direct extension of one's willpower. If your origin card is your soul, then your spirit force is your voice, your command over the very world itself. It is what separates the strong from the weak, the rulers from the ruled. His voice blurred into the background for me once again. I absent-mindedly started tapping my fingers against the desk, letting my mind wander aimlessly. At this rate, I might actually fall asleep. But then, as if the world itself had grown tired of that lecture as well, a tremor rattled the classroom. The windows shuddered, desks groaned, and a few cadets gasped in surprise. I blinked. Soon, another tremor followed, deeper this time. It was a low, resonating quake that made the entire building shudder. The professor froze mid-sentence. Silence fell over the room, save for the faint creaking of the walls. "What's this? An earthquake?" someone whispered. "No, are you stupid?" came a sharp reply. "We're thousands of feet above ground." Then turbulence. "We're not moving either." The cadet's retort was cut short as yet another tremor raked through the building. Then, from somewhere outside, deep, distant, yet unmistakable, came a low, guttural roar. My fingers stopped tapping. Ah, now this was interesting. Chairs scraped against the floor as every cadet shot up from their seats to dash toward the windows. I didn't bother getting up. My seat was by the window anyway. Instead, I lazily tilted my head to get a glimpse of whatever had caused all the commotion. Outside, the once dreamlike scenery of the Ascent Isles had twisted into something nightmarish. Cadets on the streets stopped in their tracks and tilted their heads upward. Even a few instructors and faculty members present on the training fields shifted their gazes toward the sky. Above them, above us all, a massive creature was looming just over the Crown Island. The creature was so massive that its grotesque form cast a dark shadow over the Isles. That creature, at first glance, it resembled a giant wyvern. But the details were all wrong. Its wings were jagged, like shards of obsidian forcefully embedded into flesh. Its elongated skull split unnaturally at the jaw, revealing rows upon rows of needle-like teeth. From its spine jutted dark and ropey tendrils, twitching as though searching for something. It hovered over the academy like an omen of death and destruction, every beat of its malformed wings sending unnatural gusts that stirred through the gray clouds. Then, it lunged. A collective gasp from everyone present filled up the room. Some cadets even flinched. But before the winged abomination could so much as graze the Academy's skyward towers. Boom! It slammed into an invisible force field. Almost immediately, a crushing wave of pressure exploded outward. The very air rippled and the heavens shook. The moment the creature made contact with the unseen barrier, an overwhelming force lashed back at it, sending its grotesque form spiraling through the air. Now that was spirit force. Well, an application of it. And not just any spirit force either. The Central Monarch's spirit force. The air thrummed with residual energy like a silent warning against any further aggression. The creature writhed midair, its grotesque form trembling as though finally realizing it was facing something far beyond its ability to defy. Then, with one last guttural snarl, it twisted its body in the air and fled, vanishing into the swirling sea of clouds. Silence fell over the classroom. Then, whoa, a single cadet breathed out the word, and just like that, the tension snapped. Murmurs erupted and speculation started running rampant. I simply leaned back in my seat, resting my chin on my hand again. Professor Rexard let out a short laugh. Well, that was far more exciting than my lecture. I guess this was your first time witnessing something like that, right? So, can anyone tell me what just happened? Another stretch of short silence filled the classroom for a moment before someone hesitantly answered. A beast tried to enter the barrier. Rexard nodded as a half-smirk appeared on his lips. That's true, but what exactly happened? Another pause occurred, but no one answered. He gestured for everyone to take their seats. Once they did, he spoke again. You see, my dear students, after reaching S rank, an awakened soul begins to exert pressure onto the world. Learn how to control that supernatural pressure, and you can do many things. He let his words settle before continuing. For example, by wrapping spirit force around their body, any high-ranked awakened can negate most physical debuffs and ailments from enemies of the same or lower rank. Yes, that was one of the ways the game balanced overpowered origin cards. Take mine, for instance. My command over matter itself was an absurdly powerful ability. Right now, I could only perform crude transmutations, but as I grew stronger, I'd be able to do near godlike things, like altering an object down to its atomic structure or creating almost anything out of thin air. How could an enemy possibly counter an ability like that? Well, if they were at or above S rank, they could simply shroud their body in spirit force. That alone would prevent me from directly harming my enemy by deconstructing their organic tissues or something similar. Unless I could use my own spirit force to overpower theirs. Rexard continued as I mulled over everything he'd said. Not only that, but with spirit force, you can even achieve the effects of low-level telekinesis. So, that's cool. And then, of course, there's an extension of the first ability. If you truly master this aspect of your power, you can impose your will on the world and create a physical barrier. He pointed a finger upward. That's what the current monarchs do. That's what their predecessors, the first 5 monarchs, did to save humanity and gave us safe places to live, safe zones. That was correct. The first 5 humans to reach SSS rank had imposed their will onto the world, erecting invisible barriers. Dome-shaped megacities were built within those barriers, later becoming the safe zones. Those 5 individuals were then given the title of monarchs, supreme beings akin to gods who had saved humanity from a world thrust into a nightmare. A hope for the future, that's what the monarchs had given to the world. That's why they were worshipped. That's why their families are still revered today, as they continue to produce new monarchs. Most of the world outside the safe zones is teeming with spirit beasts. The very fabric of reality out there feels thin. You may not have noticed the difference if you've only traveled by jet or Airbus. But the moment you set foot on land outside a safe zone, you must have felt it, the absence of a monarch's protection. Rexard's gaze swept across the classroom. His eyes lingered a second too long on me, Michael, Lily, Alexia, Kong, and a few other cadets who must have come from the conquered territories outside the safe zones. We gave him varying degrees of polite nods and affirmation. His smile grew. Now, here's a question. What makes monarchs different from the rest of the SSS rankers? Why can't, say, the Dawn Scourge Arthur Theosbane, or the Blackfield Butcher Tyron Zinx, or any other SSS ranker create their own safe zone? There was another beat of silence. Then, just like before, he answered his own question. Because the intensity and strength of one's will are not equal. We don't know why, but those born into monarchical bloodlines possess a will unmatched by ordinary awakened. Everyone listened in rapt attention as Rexard prepared to conclude his lesson. That is why monarchs are the protectors of humanity. Take what just happened as an example. the Ascent Isles floated a little too close to the border of the Central Monarch's force field, and all the human souls here attracted a powerful spirit beast. But the moment it tried to enter the Central Continent, the Monarchs will nearly crushed it. In the end, it had no choice but to flee. Some cadets looked ready to start applauding and cheering from how much the Monarchs were being praised. But Rexard wasn't finished. That doesn't mean the other S-rank awakened who can use spirit force, since not all of them can, are useless. In fact, it's because of them that we can close and open portals to the spirit realm. And just like that, he spent the next 15 minutes explaining what I already knew. How S-rank and above awakened could tear open holes in the fabric of reality under the right conditions, creating gateways to the nightmarish parallel dimension known as the spirit realm. Or how they could exert pressure on existing portals, forcing them to collapse and close. But spirit beasts also possessed will, making the second feat far from easy. He also talked about a few more things, but thankfully, the lecture soon came to a close right when I was about to drop dead from boredom. So, to summarize, spirit force is the will of the strong imposed upon reality. At its peak, it can shield entire cities. But it can also crush those too weak to resist it. Professor Rexard clasped his hands together, gathered his documents from the lectern, and headed for the door. That's it for today. I'll see you all on Friday. The moment he left, the classroom erupted into hushed conversations. Some cadets gathered their belongings and left as soon as they could, while others stayed behind, chatting about the creature they had just seen. I remained seated, lazily watching students filter out. Michael and Lily were standing near the entrance, discussing something passionately. Kong accompanied Alexia as she walked through the crowd with eerie accuracy despite her blindness, thanks to the senses enhancement card she had traded from me. Juliana, who had been sitting beside me during class, immediately got up and left for her alchemy elective. I didn't stop her, though. From the corner of my eye, I caught the image of Talia approaching me. But before she could get anywhere near, a loud thud echoed from the hallway outside. The murmur of voices sharpened and edged with hostility. A moment later, another thud resounded, this time, followed by a sharp grunt of pain. The classroom doors were still open, and from where I sat, I had a clear view of the corridor. A young man in a standard cadet uniform lay sprawled on the floor, struggling to get back up. A single drop of blood streaked down his chin from the corner of his lips. Standing over him was another cadet. No certification was needed to recognize his status. The arrogant look in his eyes and the air of entitled superiority made it clear enough. He was a noble, his expression twisted with barely restrained disdain as he sneered at the fallen cadet. "You're in my way. Know your place, mongrel." The commoner wiped his bloody lip and glared up at him. "You bumped into me, you arrogant bastard." And just like that, a fight sparked. I couldn't help but smile. And so it begins. 142. Michael was the ace of the first years in the game. Coming from a humble background, he faced relentless discrimination and ridicule from noble cadets who refused to acknowledge his authority. And when the commoners tried to recruit him into their faction, he turned them down. Because of that, he lost their support as well. As a result, he ended up with no standing despite being their ace. He was alone, neither side willing to follow his lead. And that made his position as the strongest of the first years far more difficult than it should have been. He faced many challenges, one of which was a side quest in which he had to stop an all-out clash between the noble and commoner factions. Factions weren't an official part of the academy. They were just cliques, loose alliances formed within the first-year batch, where cadets grouped together based on their social backgrounds. Nobles stuck with nobles, commoners stuck with commoners. It wasn't anything new. The same thing happened every academic year. What else would you think happens when you throw aristocrats and peasants into the same schooling institution? Expect them to get along. Usually, the ace was responsible for keeping these petty feuds from spiraling out of control. Either by siding with one of the factions or negotiating a ceasefire between their leaders. But Michael wasn't the type to rule with an iron fist. He lacked the confidence and conviction to command obedience. The nobles ignored him because they saw themselves as above him, and the commoners thought of him as a traitor who refused to side with their own. And when Michael beat Samael, who happened to be one of the core members of the noble faction, in a duel, a chain of events was kicked off. The nobles were furious, and the commoners, despite their dislike for Michael, couldn't have been happier to see one of those entitled brats taste the dust. And, just like that, the divide between the factions deepened and the conflict escalated far beyond what Michael could control. So, how did he deal with it? Well, it was a long process. First, Michael tried diplomacy. When that obviously failed, he resorted to brute force and challenged the leaders of each faction to duels, defeating them one by one. But even after all that, the conflict persisted. It wasn't until the class excursion arc, when their batch was ambushed by a horde of monstrous spirit beasts, that everything changed. Michael, along with a handful of other top cadets, held the line of defense and bought precious time for the rest of them to retreat. And it was only then that their batch truly began to respect him. That was when the factions finally realized the truth. They were just too weak. Their petty grudges meant nothing in the grand scheme of things. Here, at Apex Academy, they weren't nobles or commoners. They were cadets, training for one purpose, to become some of the greatest hunters the world had ever seen. It was a bittersweet and wholesome moment watching the hero gain respect from his peers. But in my opinion, that realization came far too late. Had they realized it sooner, had they focused on getting stronger instead of pointlessly fighting each other, fewer of them would have died during the excursion arc. That's why what I was doing now mattered. I would make them come to that realization today, and skip the whole pointless faction war in the process. Yesterday, I texted Vince and asked him to complete the task I gave him, make 2 members from the noble and commoner factions fight each other after class. And, as expected, Vince did as I told him. As soon as Rexard's mandatory class ended, a fight broke out in the corridor. It started small. A commoner cadet was knocked to the ground and acted like his pride stung more than his body. Then, he launched himself at the noble and threw a wild punch. The noble dodged with a smirk, stepping back with a smirk before retaliating with a brutal knee to the gut. The commoner gasped and doubled over. That should have been the end of it. But, of course, it wasn't. Another commoner rushed forward to help the first, maybe a friend, or just someone eager to just get into a fight. He shoved the noble hard, sending him stumbling into a group of cadets. Unluckily for him, that group happened to be nobles. And nobles weren't exactly known for their patience. More cadets flooded into the corridor, either curious or excited. Soon, what started as a small scuffle escalated into a barely restrained brawl. This was it, the 2 factions going all out against each other in broad daylight. Some tried to break it up. Michael, being ever the heroic protagonist, pushed his way into the crowd and started barking at people to stand down. Louis also grabbed a few by the arm and tried to pull them away. A handful of the other top 10 cadets made half-hearted attempts to defuse the situation as well. Others, like Vince, couldn't be bothered to play peacekeeper and simply ignored the commotion. Kong, standing imposingly between Alexia and the chaos, watched with the disinterest of someone deciding whether this was worth his time. Juliana was long gone. The royal twins and many other high nobles, my own sister included, stood by the doorway and watched everything unfold with quiet amusement. And I simply watched. I watched as people lost their tempers. I watched as lines were drawn. I watched as tensions that had simmered beneath the surface since the very first day finally began to bubble over. I watched as everything fell into place. Just as I had planned. Perfect. Only when the shouts turned to outright threats did I push myself up from my seat and step into the corridor. All right, that's enough. My voice cut through the noise, and for a brief moment, there was silence. Then, someone scoffed. And just like that, the fighting resumed. I let out a slow breath. Right, I probably should have expected that. My situation was similar to Michael's in the game. It wasn't that they didn't know who I was. They did. I was the ace, the so-called strongest first year. But my reputation, oh, that was a mess. Thanks to the rumors I let Vince spread and how they saw me behave, half the cadets thought I was some unhinged monster with a god complex. Which was true, I admit. The other half thought I was an overhyped fraud who didn't deserve my rank and was involved in all sorts of suspicious activities behind closed doors. Which didn't even make sense. I was the most modest person I knew, after all. Either way, none of them respected me. Not yet. The fight escalated. A noble summoned a skill card, Thunder Palm, lightning crackling at his fingertips. A commoner responded with his own, Stone Skin, his flesh hardening to absorb the hit. More cards flickered into existence, and suddenly, this wasn't just some petty brawl anymore. This was about to turn ugly. Okay, enough. This time, I didn't just speak. I drew my own card, Flame Lash. A fiery whip materialized in my hand, and without any hesitation, I snapped it against the ground. A thunderous shockwave tore through the corridor. It wasn't an attack, just a warning, but it worked. The weaker cadets stumbled back, and the rest froze in their tracks. I swept my gaze across the gathered crowd and bared my teeth. I said, that's enough. Silence. Not out of respect, not out of obedience, out of caution. Still, I could hear the murmurs. I could see it in their eyes. Why should we listen to him? That's what they all thought. And honestly, they weren't wrong to think that. They knew I was strong. I had been in the headlines for fighting my father, the Golden Duke. They had seen my brutality during the evaluation exam. They had heard of my victory over my sister, one of the strongest High Noble awakened, in a one-on-one duel. And yet, because of the rumors, they convinced themselves I wasn't deserving of my rank. It made sense, actually. Our mind rationalizes what it wants to believe. Since no one here wanted to acknowledge me, they chose to believe I was either a lunatic or a fraud. But that ended today. A noble stepped forward. I didn't need an introduction to know that he was the unofficial leader of the first-year noble faction, Leon von Asta. Beside him, a commoner did the same. That was Rainer Tovik, the one most commoners rallied behind. Leon's sharp blue eyes met mine, his gaze full of mild disdain. You're right. It is enough. So, back down, golden boy. This doesn't concern you, he said in a controlled tone. Just keep staying out of our matters like you've done until now, all right? Rainer, to his credit, was less cold. This isn't your business, Lord Theosbane. I smiled. And then, I laughed. It wasn't loud, wasn't mocking, just amused. I should stay out. It's not my business. I gestured around us. Are you guys dumb? We're in the academy. You're all in my batch. You think the ace of the first years has no business in the affairs of first years? Leon's expression didn't change, but I noticed a slight shift in his shoulders. Rainer, on the other hand, scowled. This time, his voice was definitely colder. We don't acknowledge you, Theosbane. No one does. You might have the ace, but you've done nothing to actually earn that title. Nothing, I echoed with a scoff. So, you're telling me my flawless victory against all of you in the evaluation exam was nothing? No, Leon crossed his arms, cutting in smoothly. Not all of us. You didn't win against all of us. More than half of the nobles weren't even present in that exam, were they? You were never tested against us. More than that, you don't lead us. You don't involve yourself with our batch. You've been absent from the academy for half the days since the year started. And now, suddenly, you want to step into the class matters. That's cute, I hummed, tilting my head slightly as if seriously considering his words. Then, I let out a soft laugh of realization. So, what I'm hearing is, you two are insecure. Rainer's eyes flashed. What? I mean, it makes sense, I continued casually. You two are the self-proclaimed alpha leaders of your little cliques, right? If you acknowledge me, then everyone else will too. And if that happens, then, poof, your authority disappears. You'd just be another cadet in the crowd. I gave them a mock sympathetic look. It must be exhausting, trying so hard to stay relevant. Rainer clenched his fists. Leon's smirk didn't fade, but I definitely saw his jaw twitch. You sure like to talk. I smiled brightly. I do, but I also back it up. Unlike you two in the clown circus you guys are leading. That got a reaction. The crowd erupted in furious murmurs. Some sneered, some outright hurled insults. I paid them no mind. Leon and Rainer were both glaring now as well, though they still tried to keep their expressions neutral. Yes, tried, and they failed. Their pride was already wounded. And I hadn't even started. Rainer snapped first. Stop acting like you're above us. I chuckled darkly. Oh, you really are dumb, aren't you? I am above you. The murmurs soon turned into outrage. Arrogant, conceited, unbearable. That's what they called me. I let them seethe. Okay then, prove it. Leon growled, rising to the bait like an idiot he was. I, Leon von Asta, challenge you to a duel for your title. If I lose, I'll gladly follow you. But if you lose, you'll have to grovel at my feet. Quote. Tempting, I admitted. But no, Leon's expression faltered slightly before he snarled. No, ha, I knew it. You're all bark and no bite. What happened to backing your words, golden boy? No, I mean I won't fight only you. I sighed and threw a glance at the gathered cadets. It wouldn't be fair, so let's make this interesting. Instead of accepting your duel, I'm hereby issuing an open challenge. The murmurs immediately stopped, and the smile on my face stretched into a wide grin. Any cadet ranked 11 to 20, anyone who thinks I don't deserve my title, come and take it. Silence. Then, outrage. What? He's joking. No way. Stay updated via my virtual library empire. I spread my arms dramatically, soaking in their disbelief. I'm challenging all of you. I exclaimed. Take me down and claim my title if you dare. Commoners or nobles, it doesn't matter. I'll show you why I alone stand above you all. 143. The open challenge was issued by the ace of the first years. And unsurprisingly, it was accepted. All cadets ranking from 11 to 20, all 10 of them in total, stepped forward furiously and decided to answer Samael's egoistical provocations. It was understandable. Their pride was hurt. They already didn't believe that Guy deserved the title of ace, and now he was pulling a stunt like this. A single challenge was one thing. But to stand before the class and act as if none of them were worth his time. That was a declaration of war. Quite literally. You arrogant bastard. You think you can take all of us? Hope that mouth of yours works as well as your fists, you fucker. A storm of tension brewed in the hall. The onlookers, who had been caught between awe and shock, were now buzzing with anticipation. Some of them were throwing insults and booing, some of them were whispering excitedly, and some were just watching in stunned silence. After a few minutes, 3 professors and a few members of the disciplinary committee arrived at the scene. A couple of official formalities were hastily completed, and then, as if the academy itself decided to throw fuel onto the fire, the duel was officially sanctioned. The announcement hit like a thunderclap. Public broadcast. Official first-year duel for the title of ace, Samael Kaiser Theosbane vs. Rank 11 to 20 cadets. Across the ascent aisles, hollow screens lit up. Cafeterias, dorm lobbies, training centers, everywhere, the fight was being aired live. Hundreds of camera drones filled the sky, ready to capture the first title match of the first years. And just like that, there was no backing down now. Training Field 7 was chosen as the official arena for the match. Each participant was given 20 to 30 minutes to prepare themselves before heading down to the soon-to-be battlefield. Within minutes, the crowd had grown. The arena was packed, overflowing with people. Hundreds of first-year cadets decided to ditch their optional and elective courses to witness this title match firsthand. And those who were stuck in mandatory classes were still going to watch by streaming the fight live on the Academy's website. Even a lot of upperclassmen had taken an interest, either watching from the stands or through the live localized telecast. Most of the senior cadets in attendance were second years who hadn't been deployed to Ishtara, whether due to injuries or other personal reasons. Since they were all free and had nothing better to do, they made their way here. A few third years were mixed into the crowd as well, though most were only present to assist the faculty members in overseeing the match. It was on them to ensure that no one got themselves killed in this utterly pointless brawl today. Among the many faces in the audience was Vince Cleverly. His usual playful demeanor was absent, replaced instead by intense curiosity. His keen gray eyes swept over the arena with calculated coldness as the gears in his mind turned. Interesting. Read exclusive adventures at My Virtual Library Empire. This whole situation was interesting. Over the past few days, he had pulled every connection he had in the Western Safe Zone to dig up as much information on Samael Theosbane as possible. And what he found was not at all what he'd expected. The youngest son of the Theosbane family was, for lack of a better word, a dumbass. He was an entitled, spoiled brat with unresolved daddy issues and a deep dislike for authority. A delinquent, a trash person, a stain on society. That's what he was supposed to be. But one day, just before coming to the academy, he suddenly changed. He confronted his father, did well in the interview, and won the evaluation exam to become the ace. Yet, his personality was still not much different than before considering how badly he continued to treat people around him. Like that rage bait of a speech he gave during the orientation. Or how he claimed to be above everyone just today. In fact, if anything, he seemed to have become even more self-absorbed and narcissistic now. But that's exactly what was troubling Vince. Despite his ego and theatrics, the Samael he personally met wasn't acting like an idiot. Far from it, he was much sharper than he was letting on. Everything he did had a purpose. Vince had seen enough swindlers, crooks, and conmen in his life to recognize when someone was running a game. And right now, the so-called spoiled brat was playing everyone like a fiddle. This open challenge, it wasn't just arrogance, it was a calculated move. But why? Vince tapped his fingers against his arm, eyes narrowing. His gut told him that Samael wasn't doing this just to prove himself better. No, there was something else at play here. Something bigger. There were many reasons for it. First, he had already guessed that it was Samael himself who indirectly paid Vince to spread all those rumors about him. That achieved two objectives. It gave Samael a blackmail chip to use against Vince, even though it was he who created that situation to begin with. And it also damaged his reputation just enough for the top cadets to start undermining him. Vince remembered his father once told him about different laws of power he read somewhere. One of which stated that you should guard your reputation no matter the cost because so much depends on it. A good reputation can help you win allies, gain trust, and create opportunities. A bad reputation can damage your credibility, create enemies, and limit opportunities. However, after years of dealing with all sorts of people, Vince understood a more nuanced truth. Reputation is just another tool in your arsenal. A controlled bad reputation could be just as powerful as a good one. And Samael, he was using that principle to perfection. He was making himself look like an arrogant fool, a deranged lunatic, an easy target, someone the others wanted to take down. And in doing so, he was drawing them all in by letting them drop their guard. The top-ranked cadets resented him. The lower-ranked ones hated him. The whole first-year batch was watching his every move. And now, thanks to this duel, every single first-year and even some upperclassmen were paying attention to him. And only him. Every cadet in the top 11 to 20 belonged to either of the two factions. So, if he defeated them today, he would cement himself as undisputed. After today, challenging him would be suicidal. Not to mention, after his win, he would be able to indirectly control the factions without officially being their leader, since no one would ever act out without considering him. Leon and Reiner would still be the leaders of their factions, the kings on the board, but Samael would be the hand moving them. That was why he set everything up. That brilliant bastard. Vince almost wanted to be angry. It had been a long time since he was used into someone else's plan like that, but he also couldn't help but appreciate the sheer simplicity of this ingenious plan. However, there was more to it. While coming to that conclusion, Vince also noticed something else. In the last few weeks, especially right before Samael and his squad went on their first assigned mission to Ishtara, the intensity of confrontations between the noble and commoner factions noticeably increased. Minor clashes, heated debates, and challenges between both sides grew more frequent. It was subtle at the start of the batch, nothing more than a few verbal jabs and social posturing. But ever since the team test, the confrontations escalated like dry tinder catching fire. And the tension was at an all-time high when he was away on his mission, as if waiting to snap the moment he returned, just like it did. It almost felt as if someone else was fanning the flames. Someone else was making the two factions fight each other more and more until the situation boiled into outright chaos. There was another mastermind, moving the unsuspecting pawns on an invisible chessboard. Vince frowned, and then he sighed. Ah, this is too much. He made a mental note to stay away from Samael and whatever power game he was playing in the future. After all, he came to the academy to enjoy his late teen years, swindling people, winning gambles, and making money, instead of getting dragged into messes that didn't even profit him. As he was thinking that, a sudden voice shook him awake from his right, loud and laced with over-exaggerated enthusiasm. Hey, guys, welcome to my channel. Today, I'm going live from the academy to show you all a title match between our ace and some of the top cadets in an all versus one. Vince scowled, then looked to his right. There, he saw a young man with wavy hair, light brown like the color of his eyes, smiling like an idiot while talking to his phone's camera. Vince recognized that man as Ray Warner, the second best cadet in the batch. Around him, some girls were practically jumping up and down in excitement. Was he famous? Maybe they were his fans. Vince didn't know. He didn't have much of a social media presence. Meanwhile, Ray continued talking to his camera, "Don't go anywhere. But if you have to go, check out my other most recent challenge video, Can I Survive in the Wilderness for 10 Days with a Spoon? And tell me how you like it in the comments." Vince blinked, then turned away to leave. Right then, Samael entered the arena, and everyone present erupted with different kinds of reactions. But Vince didn't care. He already knew the result of this match. Samael was going to win. Most of the people here might have chosen to forget the fact that Samael was strong, but he didn't. He couldn't blame these people. After all, it was human nature to start believing what they wanted to believe despite what was right in front of their eyes. The psychological term for it was cognitive dissonance. But they'll remember today. He mused. Maybe I should start a betting pool before I go. Yeah, that was a great idea. Why shouldn't he reap profit from this? So, that's what he did. He started a betting pool. Most people obviously placed their bets against Samael. And by the end of it, he was going to make big bucks. 144. I walked into the arena, dressed in a sleeveless black combat vest and matching track pants. The field was flooded with people, and as soon as I appeared, their gazes shifted to me. Some looked on with rapt attention, while others glanced my way with pure disdain. Some wanted to see me fail instantly, believing I deserved it for everything I had said. Others hoped at least for an entertaining fight. Nevertheless, everyone's eyes were on me. Just as I wanted. Most of what had happened so far was part of my plan. But I wasn't the only one planning things. I wasn't the only one playing this game. There were many reasons I orchestrated that scuffle between those cadets and forced both the noble and commoner factions to get involved. It was also I could challenge their leaders, and their strongest members, to a 10-against-1 match. Why did I do that? Because by crushing them here today, I'd ensure that in the future they'd have no choice but to consider me before making their next move. This wasn't just about winning. This was about ending the conflict between aristocrats and peasants in a single decisive stroke. To tell them that instead of senselessly fighting amongst each other, they should be focusing on what actually mattered, getting stronger. They should be trying to match my level. But that wasn't my only reason. As I said, I wasn't the only one playing this game. I knew that. Juliana didn't. She thought she alone was pulling the strings. She had a plan. For the past few weeks, she had been subtly manipulating different members of the two factions, stoking tensions between nobles and commoners, and letting the flames of conflict spread. She was patient and careful while waiting for the perfect moment to let it all explode. Because if the two factions clashed hard enough, it would create the chaos she needed. Why was she doing all that? Because she wanted to remove the bloodworm from her heart. To do that, she needed two things. First, she had to divert my attention. If she could keep me occupied with the faction war, I'd be too busy dealing with the fallout to notice what she was up to. The less time I spent watching her, the less I'd be able to figure out her plan. So, she intended to bury me with work. The second thing she needed was an item. A special item, one that wasn't very easy to acquire under normal circumstances. But if the academy was distracted, if everyone's focus was elsewhere, she could slip away and take what she needed without anyone noticing. That was her real goal. To create the perfect distractions. So, she fed the flames and slowly escalated the feud between nobles and commoners while I was away on my first mission, waiting for it to reach the point of no return by the time I came back. If she had kept going, the factions would have ended up clashing in an all-out war. As the ace, it would have fallen on me to defuse that situation. Most of the first years would have also been involved in that situation. But that still wouldn't have been enough. Eventually, Juliana would have created more distractions and unleashed them all on the same day, throwing both the first and third year cadets into complete chaos. Then, and only then, would she have made her move and stolen the item she needed. But that plan would have taken too long, another week or two, at least. So, I didn't let her wait. Instead of stopping her, I sped things up. By staging that scuffle between a noble and a commoner out in broad daylight, I forced the factions to react. Then, I openly insulted their leaders, mocking them in front of everyone. I called myself superior and trashed every single cadet present there. Which, by the way, was all true. I was indeed above them. But naturally, the first years didn't take kindly to my unfiltered arrogance. Just as I planned. And then, I went even further. I challenged them all, both factions, every cadet ranked 11 to 20, in a 10-against-1 fight. It was an outrageous challenge, so absurd that it instantly became the biggest event in the academy. The conflict escalated faster than anyone had expected, and before long, everyone was watching me. Everyone's eyes were on me. The higher-ups wouldn't interfere. The factions wouldn't focus on anything else. Even the cadets who weren't involved would be watching. And that gave Juliana exactly what she wanted. A perfect distraction. It wasn't enough, of course. She'd have to do something herself as well. But right now, I had given her the perfect opportunity, an opening that she could exploit for her gains. And I knew she'd take it. I smirked. She must be thinking that she had tricked me into setting up the ideal conditions for her. That I had unknowingly played into her hands, handing her the window she needed to steal the item for her plans. But the truth was that this was my game. She was moving exactly as I wanted her to, at precisely the moment I had anticipated. I let her think she was in control. I let her believe she was winning. I was giving her a false sense of victory. But in the end, every piece on the board, even her, was moving according to my will. Just the way I liked it. Hey, the smirk on my face widened as I stretched my arms, slowly walking toward the center of the arena. There was not a wrinkle of hesitation on my face, nor a hint of doubt tainted my steps. My posture was loose and my movements unhurried. It was as if, despite going up against some of the best cadets in our batch, I felt no pressure at all. Seeing that, the booing crowd fell silent for a short moment. But only for a moment. Then, the uproar came back louder than before as everyone started throwing curses and boos again. Amidst the noise, a familiar voice called out to me. "Hey, Samael." I frowned and turned my head only to see Michael pacing beside me with an uncharacteristically bright smile plastered across his face. Something was off. Hey, Michael. I greeted. His smile twitched, then dropped entirely. His eyes darkened. "What the fuck are you doing?" I blinked. "What?" He gestured around us at the arena full of people. "Why did you issue an open challenge?" I rolled my shoulders. "To put an end to their faction nonsense." Michael gave me a blank stare. I sighed. "To put everyone in their place." Michael dragged a hand down his face. "You realize you just painted the biggest target imaginable on your back, right? Even if you win, they won't just accept it and move on. They'll hold grudges." I smirked. "That's the point." He gave me a look that suggested he thought I had lost my mind. "How the hell is that the point?" I stopped and turned to face him fully. "I don't need them to like me. I need them to fear me. If I beat the top cadets here, no one will dare move against me for a long time. They'll have no choice but to acknowledge my strength." My gaze swept over the crowd. "You'd be surprised how many problems can be solved by unrestrained violence." Michael stared at me, unblinking. Then he exhaled sharply. "You know what? I don't even care. Do whatever you want. Just don't expose that, got it?" I didn't need to ask what he meant. He was talking about the essence circulation technique. If anyone realized the truth, they wouldn't just come after me, they'd come after him too. So, he was indirectly asking me to hide it and, by extension, not use my full strength. I waved a hand dismissively. Yeah, I know." Michael didn't look convinced. He opened his mouth, likely about to say something else, when. "What are you guys whispering about?" Another voice chimed in from behind. We both flinched and immediately whipped around to see a petite ginger trailing after us, her sightless gray eyes locked in our general direction. It was Alexia. Michael stiffened before hastily laughing her off. "Nothing important." Alexia tilted her head, clearly not convinced. If it's not important, why do you both sound so suspicious?" Michael shot me a desperate look, silently pleading for backup. I smiled. "Oh, we were just discussing how Michael thinks I'm an idiot who's biting off more than I can chew." Michael groaned. "That is not what I said." Alexia hummed as an amused smile formed on her lips. "I mean, he's not wrong. This fight is going to be tough." Before I could respond, she proudly puffed out her chest. "But I believe in you, Lord Samael. I even placed a bet on you." I scowled. "There are bets going on." She nodded, grinning. "Arg, I had a very strong suspicion that Vince was behind this. That profit-driven opportunistic bastard." Michael, meanwhile, turned to Alexia with a stony look. "By the way, it's bad manners to sneak up on people and eavesdrop." Alexia glanced at him and then scoffed in mock disbelief. "Wow, how the days have changed. I, a high noble, am being lectured on etiquette by a peasant." Michael outraged. "Hey, that sounded very discriminatory." Alexia rolled her eyes, barely holding a laugh. "Oh, cry me a river." Shaking my head, I reached the center of the field as those two continued their ridiculous back and forth. A stern-faced faculty member impatiently stepped forward. "Cadet Samael," he addressed me, "you still haven't appointed an officiator. Choose one and begin your match immediately, you're already the last to arrive." "Ah, right, I needed a referee." The faculty and third years were only here to intervene if someone was about to die. They weren't here to officiate the match. I sighed, then patted Michael on the back. "Well, there you go." He wrinkled his nose. Why me?" I gave him a flat look. "What do you mean why?" "Because you're already here, and because only the top 10 can officiate a match." Michael opened his mouth, closed it, then tried again. "So ask any other top 10. I shrugged. "I don't know most of them." Michael squinted at me. I patted him again. "Also, as the ace, I'm well within my rights to assign you. So, go ahead." He pointed accusingly at Alexia. "Then pick her." Alexia gave him a deadpan stare. "Yes, Mikey, because appointing a blind girl as referee is definitely the better option. Sometimes, I am truly in awe of your boundless wisdom." Tisk. Michael clicked his tongue, crossing his arms before letting out a resigned grunt. Fine, Find your next read at my virtual library empire. Alexia grinned, wished me luck, then walked off to find a spot to watch the match from. Michael turned to the faculty member, who gave a nod before stepping back. The match would begin as soon as everything was set. I rolled my shoulders, inhaling deeply as I finally looked at the 10 cadets who were about to face me. 5 of them stood to my left, and the remaining 5 were on my right. Their expressions varied. Some were brimming with confidence, others looked tight with tension. Most, however, wore a smug look. The kind that told me they thought they would definitely win this. Michael strode to the far center and raised a hand. All right, everyone, this is an official match for the title of ace. Whoever takes down the current ace, Samael Kaiser Theosbane, wins. If all of you fail, you lose. There is no time limit. He lowered his tone slightly. You can fight however you want. All cards and artifacts are allowed. Lethal attacks are allowed. If anyone is about to die, the faculty will step in. The only rule is no outside interference. Other than that, he glanced between me and my opponents. You're free to do whatever you want. One of the noble cadets, a broad-shouldered guy with short dark hair, scoffed. We'll make this quick. I didn't respond. Michael sighed and raised his hand even higher. All right, on my count. I exhaled, relaxing my stance. 3. The crowd's jeering intensified. 2. My origin card began materializing above my shoulder. 1. And I felt the rush of adrenaline in my veins. Finally, Michael dropped his hand. Fight. 145. The battle was about to start. There were many people present here on the training field. It was built like an arena, with stands for people to sit in and balconies to watch from. It was much closer to a small stadium, actually. And it was filled with people. Everyone was here to witness the first title match of the first years. In fact, it was the first title match of this academic year. An ace can put their title on the line in a duel, but most of them don't do that. Why would they? Unless they had something to gain from the fight. So, title matches were rare outside of a few examinations and events where it was mandatory for an ace to defend their position against a worthy challenger. So, needless to say, people were excited. And a lot of them were excited for another reason. They wanted to see Samael Kaiser Theosbane fall. That arrogant bastard. People hadn't forgotten his speech during the award ceremony on the day of orientation. They hadn't forgotten how he acted like he was better than them all the time. That lunatic, how did he ever get the position of the ace? Sure, he was strong, but he was undeserving of that title. He once ate a cake from the ground, for God's sake. And yet he had the audacity to call them inferior. That egotistical fool. So, yeah, most of the audience present here was wishing for his downfall. And one among them was Calum Ardent himself, one of the participants in today's match, cadet rank 20. He was in the commoner faction. And he was ready to do anything to get his revenge against Samael today. Calum stood at the left edge of the arena, his fingers curling and uncurling into fists by his sides. Beneath his gloves, the heat of his own anger pulsed through his skin. He could still remember that day. The day of the evaluation exam when Samael Theosbane had taken everything from him with an infuriating, smug smirk. He had trapped him and a few more cadets in the ground using his innate power, and then he began extorting everyone. Yes, instead of eliminating them with dignity, he forced them to pay him in exchange for not eliminating them. That in itself was fine, but he took something else from Calum as well. He took his sword, a sword that his father had sacrificed so much to buy. That blade was supposed to be a chance at his family's future. His sister had a chronic illness, but she bravely held back her tears as she smiled at him the day he left for Apex Academy. You'll be strong, right, Cal? You'll win. He remembered her saying that, her voice soft, her hands small in his. And he had promised her. He had promised to win, to get stronger, to rise high enough in the ranks to earn a sponsorship, one that would let him afford the treatment she needed. That sword was a part of that dream. His father had taken a loan to buy it, believing in him, trusting that he would wield it to carve out a future for their family. But Samael Theosbane took it. He hadn't even needed it. He took it because he just could. He took it like it meant nothing. Like Calum meant nothing. After that, Calum barely survived the elimination period before being taken out by a blind noble girl that he would later come to realize was the scion of the Zinxex family. Nevertheless, that day Calum learned a valuable lesson. If you are strong, you can do anything. So, that's what he did. He trained like a maniac and became strong. Strong enough so that one day he could take his revenge on the youngest Theosbane. Strong enough so that he wouldn't feel insignificant ever again. He rose through the rankings, challenging one cadet after another. He challenged everyone who was above him and pushed them down, climbing toward the zenith. Climbing toward Samael. And he once got so close to his revenge. During the team test, Calum was assigned to Squad 14. With one of his teammates, he attacked Samael when they encountered him in the forest. But that golden-haired bastard ran. He ran. He dodged their attacks and ran. Calum gritted his teeth. It's fine. Today, that bastard can't run. Today, Calum had the chance for his revenge. Today, he would make Samael regret ever looking down on him and remind him that not even the mighty Theospanes could trample on the weak forever. He would become the ace and get the Academy's best healers to treat his sister. He would give his father enough money to retire peacefully. He would win. Calum calmed himself down, barely suppressing his burning wrath as the object of his resentment entered the battlefield. With 2 of the top 10 cadets, Michael and Alexia by his side, Samael came to stand at the center. Across the field, the noble faction stood. Their leader, Leon von Asta, looked equally eager to start the fight. Beside Calum, Reiner Tovik stood like an immovable wall. His arms crossed and face impassive. He was the leader of the commoner faction. There were more powerful people present here, as well. People like Gaius Vorden, whose berserk rage made him one of the most feared cadets in the batch. Your next journey awaits at my virtual library empire. Erwin Holt, who was renowned as one of the fiercest marksmen and scouts the Academy had seen in recent years. Cylin Mordain, who excelled at working within large teams due to her innate ability to link people telepathically. And many more. Each of them had their reasons for wanting to defeat Samael. Some sought to claim his title, while others wished to put him in his place. Regardless, they were all prepared to begin. So the moment Michael dropped his hand, the arena exploded into chaos. Fight. As soon as that single word left Michael's lips, the battlefield erupted with movements. From either side of the arena, cadets rushed toward the center. Toward Samael. But instead of looking concerned, Samael smiled. It wasn't a smile of arrogance or mockery. It was a simple, pure expression of joy. Like an artist seeing a blank canvas. Like a musician hearing the first note of a melody. Like a beast baring its fangs before a hunt. Finally, he moved as the attacks started coming crashing down on him. The first one to reach Samael was a broad-shouldered guy from the noble faction named Doran Stormwatch. Doran's batch rank was 16, and he also had a personal vendetta against the youngest son of the Theospanes. During the evaluation exam, Samael had trapped Doran and his lackeys in a wall like some grotesque art pieces and made them entertain him. Whilst in the middle of an important exam, no less. Doran still remembered the humiliation he felt. On that day, he swore on his family's name and honor to humiliate that Theospane wretch the very same way when he did. And today, he had his chance. Doran's origin card was already materialized over his shoulder, Windreaper. It granted him the innate power to completely erase the air resistance, boosting both his speed and attack potency to an unimaginable degree. Using that power, Doran closed the distance in a heartbeat, his figure blurring through the air like a bullet. In his hands was a giant mace that he raised high and swung down in a brutal arc, intending to crush Samael right then and there, quite literally. Boom! The sheer force of the swing sent a shockwave rippling through the battlefield. Dust exploded into the air, and a crater formed where the mace struck on the concrete ground. But to his shock, Samael wasn't there. Before he could react, a silhouette emerged from the cloud of swirling dust and weaved past Doran to stand beside him like a ghost. Too slow, Samael whispered in his ear. Doran barely had time to register the voice before he felt something, a sharp tap against the back of his knee. His leg buckled. Samael had struck his joint with pinpoint precision and forced the Stormwatch Scion to stumble. And before Doran could recover, bam! A vicious punch connected squarely to his face, sending him flying across the arena like a ragdoll. The incoming cadets either jumped or changed directions to avoid crashing into Doran as he hit the ground hard and rolled a few times like a bowling ball. The entire exchange lasted less than 3 seconds. But Samael didn't stop. He didn't even slow down. In the next moment, he pivoted and smoothly twisted his body out of the way of an incoming sword thrust. It was Calum himself who had joined the fray with his new sword in hand. His own origin card was hovering over his head, Emberbrand. It gave him the boon that any wounds inflicted by his weapon would burn endlessly until fully healed. Last time, before he could even swing his sword, that bastard had contorted the ground beneath Calum to throw him off balance. But this time, Calum was ready. He had studied Samael. He had stalked him like prey. He knew that while Samael's ability was formidable, it had limits. For one, he could only transmute objects by touching them directly with his hands. That in itself was a clear weakness, but depending on the complexity and scale of the transmutation, it could also take him anywhere from an instant to several seconds to complete. Direct physical contact for at least a second, that was the price of his overwhelming power. And in a fast-paced battle, a second might as well be an eternity. That meant Samael was strong, but he was far from invincible. Against multiple opponents in a head-on confrontation alone, he wasn't at an advantage. Thus, today, Calum wouldn't give him the chance to use his ability, not on the terrain, not on anything at all. Taking a step back, he whipped his sword in a sweeping horizontal slash while shouting, "I'll have my revenge today, you cocky bastard." 146. Samael tilted his head back, effortlessly letting the blade slice through the air just inches away from his nose. He watched with mild amusement as Calum immediately pivoted on back foot and twisted his body to perform another strike, a straight thrust, this time aimed at Samael's chest. It was fast and precise. But also predictable. Samael took a half step forward and veered sideways, evading the blade and leaning closer until he could hear Calum's heart beating like a war drum in his chest. Samael's voice was almost a bored whisper when he asked, "Revenge? Do I even know you?" Calum's eyes flared with rage. But before he could physically react, Samael moved. A sharp elbow strike slammed into Calum's ribs, knocking the wind out of his lungs with such force that his vision flashed white for a split second. He staggered back, gasping in pain, but Samael was already on him. Calum instinctively raised his sword and lashed out in a wild swing. But this time, Samael didn't try to dodge. Instead, he tried to catch the incoming blade by clasping it between his palms. Within a fraction of a second, Calum realized that Samael was going to use his power to destroy the sword. So, reacting as fast as he could, he awkwardly jerked the blade aside to change the trajectory. But in doing so, he lost his balance for just a moment. A moment too long. Samael capitalized instantly. His hand shot forward, clamping around Calum's wrist. "You don't want me to use my power?" Samael mused, twisting sharply. "Then, don't be so slow." Calum barely had time to yell before the world turned upside down. No, it wasn't the world that turned. It was him. Samael had pivoted under Calum's arm and flipped him over his shoulder. In the very next moment, Calum was slammed hard into the ground. It was jarring and painful, but he didn't stay down. Gritting his teeth, he rolled, just in time to avoid Samael's foot stomping down where his head had been a second ago. "That bastard!" With an angered snarl, Calum pushed off the ground and swung his sword again. There was no pause in his movement. No hesitation, because if he were to hesitate right now, he'd lose. As long as Samael couldn't make direct contact with anything for more than a second, he couldn't use his ability. Calum just had to keep moving and keep Samael busy. Wait, why couldn't he move his foot? Calum's eyes widened in horror. His heart dropped in realization as he looked down. The ground under him had turned soft, almost mushy. Like quicksand, and his boots had sunk into it. It was then he understood what happened. Samael must have touched the ground earlier while slamming him down. It had only taken a second. And it was enough. That was all the time he needed to brush his fingers against the ground to transmute the immediate terrain around them. Calum's head snapped up and he saw Samael already closing in, intending to finish him right then and there. Calum roared in frustration, wrenching against the sinking ground, trying to break free. But it was too late. He wasn't fast enough. Luckily, someone else was. Boom! A sonic shockwave tore through the battlefield as Leon von Asta, the leader of the noble faction, had finally made his move. He had raised his hands and pressed them together to form the shape of a handgun using his fingers. His origin card, Skybreaker's Judgment, glowed brightly as azure arcs of electricity crackled across his body, converging at the barrel of his handgun. Then, with a deadly calm, he took aim at Samael. The world blurred with a flash of white-blue light as a bolt of lightning shot toward Samael. Thankfully, the golden-haired ace had seen the attack coming from the corner of his eye long ago and activated his Steelhide card in time. The lightning struck Samael in the side with a deafening crack of thunder. The force of it blasted him sideways like a ragdoll until he crashed into the ground and skidded across the concrete for a few meters. By the end of it, he rolled with the momentum and rose to one knee, shaking his head in a daze. Residual arcs of electricity sparked across his vest, snapping and popping before fading into the air. Exhaling slowly, Samael felt his ribs ache in pain, not from the electricity itself, but from the sheer concussive force behind that attack. Steelhide had dulled the damage but hadn't negated the impact. Not completely, at least. He wasn't injured, but he was definitely hurt. Yet, in an intense battle like this, he had no time to rest. Gritting his teeth, he groaned and pushed himself to his feet. The side of his vest, where the lightning had struck, was charred and smoldering. But perhaps he was still too slow to stand back up, because the moment he did, something thick and rope-like slithered around him. A tentacle, a massive tentacle coiled around his torso, like a snake wrapping itself around a mouse, before hoisting him into the air. The man behind it was none other than Reiner, the leader of the Commoner faction. His right arm had transformed into a monstrous appendage. His origin card, Abyssborn, allowed him to sprout 4 to 5 prehensile tentacles from literally anywhere on his body, each capable of stretching up to 6 meters and thickening to monstrous proportions. Right now, one of those tentacles had ensnared Samael. The girthy, sinewy limb constricted Samael's movements like an iron vice threatening to crush the breath from his lungs. Reiner stood firm on the ground, his expression completely impassive as he flexed his transformed arm, tightening his hold even further. But he wasn't content with just trapping Samael. No, with a sharp motion, he whipped his tentacle arm downward, slamming Samael into the ground with bone-shattering force. The impact cracked the concrete beneath, and a pained grunt escaped Samael's lips as the shock rattled through his bones. But once again, he had no time to recover, because, merely a second later, the tentacle yanked him back up in midair once more. Dangling several feet off the ground, Samael grimaced as the coils around his body tightened further still, almost crushing his bones to powder. Reiner was really trying to squeeze him to death. But Samael had no intention of letting that happen. With a thought, he activated Steelhide once again and reinforced his body, while at the same time summoning another one of his acquire cards, Piercing Bolt. Shimmering particles of light began to coalesce at his fingertips as he pointed them toward Reiner. Reiner didn't know what that ability was, and he had no interest in finding out. With a sneer, he poured even more strength into his tentacle, desperately trying to squeeze Samael before he could use his newly cast card. Unluckily for him, because of Steelhide, the added pressure became nothing but a small inconvenience for Samael. Reiner clicked his tongue in frustration. Someone take out that bastard's defense card. And his order was immediately heeded. Standing at the farthest position from the ongoing battle, almost at the edge of the arena, was Erwin Holt. He was arguably the best scout and sniper in the first-year batch right now. And he had been lying in wait. His origin card, Laplace's Deadeye, granted him supernatural aim and the ability to predict his target's movements for the next 3 seconds. Looking through his scope, Erwin locked his crosshair onto Samael's Steelhide card. Boom. But before he could pull the trigger and fire the shot, another blinding bolt of lightning split through the world. Only this time, the lightning didn't strike Samael. It struck Reiner. The thunderbolt shot through Reiner's transformed limb, charring the flesh and severing the tentacle cleanly. The burned appendage fell to the ground, along with Samael, who landed lightly on his feet. He didn't even need to look to know who was responsible. TCH. Leon, you bastard, Reiner cursed, his face twisting in fury as he glared at the noble faction's leader. He wasn't cursing because of the pain, though the sight of his severed limb writhing on the ground was certainly infuriating. It was because Leon had deliberately intervened right when he was about to win. Lowering his still glowing handgun fingers, Leon smirked. Relax, Reiner, you weren't going to finish him anyway. Besides, he's my prey. Reiner's expression darkened, but before he could spit out a retort, Samael made his move. His palms pressed against the ground, and the terrain bent to his will. With a low rumble, a massive concrete log shot upward from the ground, rocketing toward Reiner like a battering ram. Reiner's instincts screamed at him to move, but he couldn't. He wasn't fast enough to get away in time. So, he reacted with pure reflex. His remaining arm twisted, its flesh morphing and sprouting into another thick tentacle to shield himself. Crack. The impact was brutal, even with a giant tentacle cushioning the blow. The sheer force of the rocketing log flung Reiner back like a broken marionette. Read the latest on my virtual library Empire. But Samael didn't have time to savor the satisfying result of his attack. Because at that moment, a hulking silhouette was already barreling toward him from the left. It was a giant young man. And calling him a giant wasn't exaggerating. His towering frame, nearly 7 feet tall, was ripped with muscles bulging beneath his taut skin like boulders threatening to burst. That was Jos Vorant, and unlike the others, this was someone Samael actually recognized and acknowledged as a threat. Jos' innate power, Bloodhowl allowed him to go into a frenzied state called battle rage, where the angrier he got, the stronger and more muscular he became. Pain and fear meant nothing to him in this state. All that remained in his mind was the will to utterly dominate his foes until they were squandered like bugs. That was why he was called the Berserker. Joss leapt high in the air and plummeted toward Samael like a descending meteor. Samael barely had time to react as Joss came crashing down. He hit the ground with such force that the impact sent a localized earthquake. A brutal shockwave rolled outward as dust and debris exploded into the air like a small explosion going off. Samael had already moved. He rolled back just in time to avoid being flattened. But even then, the shockwave from Jaws landing nearly threw him off balance. And yet, that wasn't all. Samael soon spotted another enemy rushing toward him. It was one of the nobles, Rowan Dusk. His innate power, Jester's Masquerade, allowed him to create 5 illusionary clones, each one capable of creating heat and sound that made them nearly indistinguishable from the real him. So Samael wasn't surprised when several identical figures began attacking him. But he wasn't fazed by Rowan's illusions. If anything, those clones were an annoyance more than a real threat. Distractions, that was what they were. They attacked, but their punches and kicks passed harmlessly through Samael's body like a mirage. Samael ignored them and focused instead on evading Jaws' relentless assault. The Berserker, true to his name, fought like a rampaging beast. Each punch he threw carried enough force to shake the earth. Every one of his strikes was violent enough to stir the wind and shatter the ground on impact. Samael ducked beneath a wild hook, jumping back a few feet just as Jaws' fist obliterated the spot he had been standing on. Finally, after creating a safe distance between himself and the mindless giant, Samael launched his own attack. He raised his hand and activated Piercing Bolt again. A bright beam of light shot toward one of Rowan's figures which was getting too close to him. But his attack easily passed through it, signaling it was a clone. Samael clicked his tongue and sidestepped as Joss came barreling toward him again, throwing out a crushing haymaker. He avoided it by a hair's breadth, feeling the displaced wind brush against his cheek as the massive fist barely missed him. Meanwhile, Rowan and his clones continued circling around him, flitting in and out of Samael's peripheral vision like ghosts. They weren't meant to attack. They were meant to distract. Samael could already guess Rowan's strategy. Rowan was distracting him using his illusion so he could sneak up on Samael and finish him off with a backstab. And very soon, it happened. Just as Samael turned to evade another one of Jaws' crushing blows, Rowan lunged from behind with a dagger gleaming in his grasp. There, Samael smirked. At the last possible moment, just as the blade was about to be plunged into his back, he reactivated Steel Hide. A dull clink rang out as the dagger failed to pierce Samael's hardened skin. Rowan's eyes widened in disbelief. And that hesitation cost him. Samael whirled around and grabbed Rowan by the arm in the blink of an eye. "Can't run now, can you?" he murmured. Then, right as Jaws' massive fist came roaring toward him, Samael yanked Rowan into its path. Thwam! There was a sickening thud as Jaws' punch connected with the force of a speeding car, sending Rowan flying back as his limbs flailed wildly. He fell down a few meters away but didn't get back up. He wasn't going to. One down. Samael wasn't finished. At that exact same moment, he dropped and placed his palm on the ground, and the land under Jaws' feet subtly shifted. The Berserker, caught mid-motion, suddenly lost his footing. His balance broke, and that was all Samael needed. A blunt, thick spike of concrete erupted from the ground, rising at an angle and slamming into Jaws' solar plexus with the force of a siege engine. The massive young man gasped as the air was violently driven from his lungs. His entire body jerked. Then, like a felled giant, Jaws collapsed. 2 down, 8 more to go. 147. When the first cadet fell, the cheering from the crowd quieted slightly. Anyone who had ever faced Rowan Vale Dusk in battle, or even witnessed him fight, knew he was one of the most terrifying combatants of the noble faction. His ability to create illusionary clones that were indistinguishable from the real him was a nightmare to deal with for any opponent. Yet, Samael effortlessly took him out. He ignored Rowan's illusions and allowed him to draw near. And when Rowan's surprise attack failed, Samael grabbed his arm and threw him in front of the rampaging Joss. Then he moved on to face Joss himself. Known as the Berserker, Joss Vorant was a giant young man who had earned a fearsome reputation throughout the first-year batch despite being a commoner. People feared facing him because the longer a fight dragged on, the more powerful he grew. It was widely believed that defeating him alone was impossible. At least, that was the common belief until now. Until Samael knocked him down with such brutal efficiency that it was almost pitiful. As soon as the giant young man collapsed, the training field fell silent. Booing ceased, and jeering quieted. For the first time since the match began, a haunting realization dawned upon the spectators. Maybe, just maybe, Samael might succeed. He might win. However, that silence was shattered in the next moment by the sharp sound of a deafening gunshot. Samael, still on his knees with his hands pressed against the ground, flinched. Before he could react, a bullet struck, not him, but one of the cards hovering over his shoulders. The card that had aided him the most in this battle, Steelhide, shattered into shimmering sparks that rained down like glowing snowflakes. Samael's eyes snapped up to the edge of the field, where a sharpshooter named Erwin Holt stood, his sniper rifle still raised and smoke curling from its barrel. "Oh, come on," Samael cried out in frustration, clearly devastated by the loss of one of his favorite cards. In battles like this, snipers posed a considerable threat. Unlike brute fighters and melee combatants, sharpshooters could dictate the pace of the fight from a safe distance. They could provide cover and force their targets to constantly remain on the move to avoid getting shot. And surely enough, after destroying his defensive card, Erwin locked his crosshairs on Samael. Tisk! Samael clicked his tongue and used his innate power to erect a thick concrete wall in front of him, obstructing Erwin's view and forcing him to reposition. However, before he could catch even a second of respite, Samael noticed Leon charging up another lightning bolt to strike him down. After Erwin the sharpshooter, Leon was one of the most troublesome cadets on the field. And one of the strongest. His innate ability to fire high-voltage plasma arcs made him a relentless force in long-range combat. And now that Samael had no physical defense to shield his body, even a single thunderbolt could take him out of the fight. He couldn't afford to be hit by it. Not even once. So by the time a crackling bolt of plasma surged toward him, Samael was already in motion. He rolled sharply to the side as the electric blast seared past him, leaving the air electrically charged and buzzing. A moment later, the ground where he had crouched exploded into a smoldering crater. Leon clicked his tongue, already gathering another shot as tendrils of electricity snaked toward his fingertips. Samael didn't hesitate. In a fluid motion, he pushed off the ground and dashed forward at startling speed. If there was one surefire way to deal with a ranged fighter, it was to not give them space. Fight them in close quarters. And that was exactly what Samael was going to do. Of course, Leon wasn't going to let him close the distance that easily. He shot another bolt of lightning toward Samael. But the golden-haired ace had already reacted by jumping high and twisting his body midair. The streak of electricity crackled past him, missing by mere inches. He caught the acrid scent of burnt ozone and felt the sharp heat singing his hair. But aside from that, he was fine. He landed lightly on his feet and continued his forward dash, closing the gap. Every ability had at least one weakness. A restriction. Leon's weakness was simple. After firing 2 or 3 consecutive lightning bolts, he had to wait 10 to 15 seconds before firing again. And that was more than enough time to create an opening. To capitalize on it, Samael summoned another one of his cards, Flame Arrow, and in response, swirling orange flames coiled around his right hand, materializing into a blazing arrow. Without breaking stride, he pulled his arm back and got ready to launch the arrow forward. Whoosh! When all of a sudden, he sensed movement. His gaze flicked to the side. And he saw a lithe young woman right there, swinging a gleaming short blade straight for his throat. Samael's eyes widened. How did she get so close without him noticing? He never considered himself some peerless battle genius or anything, but he sure as hell had good spatial awareness. Sneaking up on him without his notice shouldn't have been possible. But thankfully, after practicing Michael's essence circulation technique, not only had his body strengthened, but his reflexes had become razor sharp as well. So as the dagger arced toward him, the world seemed to slow down. Samael dropped low just in the nick of time and let the blade slice right above his head. Then, in the same motion, he rolled backward, pushed off the ground, and sprang several steps away, landing back to safety. What the hell? He muttered, looking toward where the girl had been. But she wasn't there. In fact, she was nowhere to be seen now. Samael instantly realized what happened. That young woman was Vena Rosen. And her origin card, Graceless Phantom, allowed her to turn invisible as long as she stayed in the shadows. Arg! Samael gritted his teeth as his eyes flicked ahead. There was a long stretch of shadow between him and Leon, cast by the setting sun and one of the towering light posts of the arena. Leon had positioned himself carefully just beyond that line of darkness, in which Vena was lurking unseen, waiting for a chance to strike. If Samael dared to cross that shadow, she would take him out. That was why Leon had baited him into rushing in. Find more chapters on my virtual library empire. It was a good plan. Unfortunately for them, Samael had dodged Vena's ambush. As a result, the noble faction, and even much of the audience in the stands, fell into stunned silence. Everyone understood one thing at that moment. They had lost their best chance to take Samael cleanly out of the fight. And that was going to cost them. But Samael didn't have time to relish their shock. From his left, a broad-shouldered figure lunged at him with a massive mace swinging through the air. It was Doran Stormwatch. Samael sidestepped just in time as the mace crashed into the ground, splintering the concrete beneath. Then, from behind, another attacker rushed forward. It was a tall figure wielding a longsword. That was Calum Ardent. The two of them unleashed a barrage of swings, slashes, and thrusts, their personal vendettas fueling their rage. Samael quickly found a moment to encase his right hand in a thick concrete gauntlet. Then, he weaved between their attacks, evading or parrying every strike with masterful precision. It was a blur of motion. He seemed to be always one step ahead, his gauntleted fist deflecting every blow he couldn't dodge. His technique was unrefined, but the display of his skills were pure masterclass. Doran roared and swung his mace down in a brutal arc. Samael veered to the side and threw a fire arrow. The flaming projectile struck Doran's chest and exploded on impact, sending him stumbling back a few steps. Calum jumped on him from the left, but Samael's foot snapped up, kicking him square in the face and knocking him back. Doran, still groaning from the blast, whipped his mace toward Samael again. But Samael stepped in close, too close for the mace to be effective, and drove his gauntleted fist into Doran's jaw. The noble staggered back one more time, too helpless to do anything as Samael pressed forward and landed a vicious punch to his throat. Doran coughed violently and dropped down to one knee. Calum tried to capitalize when Samael's back was turned by thrusting a sword toward his exposed thigh. But catching Samael off guard seemed to be impossible today. The golden-haired spun around Ace and batted Calum's blade aside with his gauntleted hand before delivering a forward kick to the boy's chest, sending him flying back. Then, something strange happened. A shimmering veil of green light enveloped both Doran and Calum and their bruises slowly faded, their wounds mending. Samael's scowl deepened. His gaze flicked toward Leon, then behind him. Right behind the leader of the noble faction stood a short blonde girl. Her origin card glowed brightly above her head and her face was twisted in a grimace. A healer. Her name was Leora Glade. Her ability allowed her to heal others by taking their pain onto herself. As long as they weren't knocked out, she could keep healing them until she reached her own pain threshold. Annoying. So damn annoying. Healers were the second most frustrating enemies to deal with after long-range fighters on a battlefield. And right now, she was healing both Doran and Calum, both the noble and commoner. Apparently, both factions had decided to set aside their rivalry. They had now realized that the only way to take Samael down was to work together. Smart. But it was too late. If they had done this from the start, maybe they would have had a chance. Samael exhaled sharply and set his sights on Leora. He was going to take out the healer first. But before he could move, a large tentacle came speeding toward him, forcing him to move away as it crashed into the ground, carving a deep trench into the concrete. Soon, a tentacle lashed at him. He ducked to avoid it. But then a third tentacle came down from above, promoting him to roll out of the way before it could smash him flat. Huffing, Samael snapped his gaze to the source. Standing a few meters away was Reiner, the commoner faction leader. His severed right-hand tentacle was still regrowing, but 3 new ones had sprouted, 2 from his back and 1 from his left arm. Not so arrogant now, are you, golden boy? Reiner sneered. His tentacles cracked through the air like whips, slicing with terrifying speed and force. Doran came in from the right, his mace raised high. Calum darted in from the left, his longsword gleaming under the arena lights. Both of them were now fully healed. Samael twisted and wove between their attacks, keeping his movements sharp yet fluid. A tentacle snapped toward his ribs. He barely ducked under it before Doran's mace swung down. He sidestepped, only to find Calum lunging forward with a blade aiming for his shoulder. Damn it, he cursed in his mind. Their coordination had drastically improved all of a sudden for some reason. Well, Samael knew the reason. It was another girl, Sylvan Mordain, a commoner. She was standing far away, subtly manipulating the battlefield, moving her allies like pieces on a chessboard. Her ability allowed her to establish a telepathic link between willing targets. Before, only the commoner faction had been benefiting from it. But now, the nobles were using it too. And because of that, their synergy had suddenly skyrocketed. They didn't need to call out instructions. No words were necessary to know whom to cover, when to attack, or how to create an opening. It was an incredible support ability. And because of that, Reiner, Doran, and Calum were pushing Samael back. He parried, dodged, and countered, but they weren't giving him a moment to breathe. Finally, Calum managed to force an opening by executing a wide horizontal slash and forcing Samael to take a step back. But his foot landed just a bit too far. And that brief misstep was a mistake. One of Rainer's tentacles slammed into Samael's torso. Boom! He was flung backward, crashing hard against the ground and rolling a few times before skidding to a stop. Pain lanced through his ribs as he gasped for breath. Arg! Groaning, he forced himself to move, pushing up to his knees. When he looked up, he saw Doran and Calum rushing toward him, weapons in hand. 3 of Rainer's tentacles whipped toward him. At the edge of the arena, Erwin had repositioned and lined up a clean shot. Far in front, Leon was already aiming, preparing to launch another bolt of lightning as sparks of electricity lit up across his body. It was kind of a cinematic scene. So many enemies. One man on his knees. Everyone thought he had lost. Everyone thought this was the end of his reign as the ace. One of them, probably Reiner or Leon, was going to take him down. But all of them were wrong. A defiant glint flashed in Samael's eyes as he smirked and conjured another flame arrow, but this time, instead of throwing it at them, he hurled it straight at the ground beneath him. Boom! The arrow detonated on impact, kicking up a swirling cloud of dust, smoke, and debris that obscured everything in sight. The crowd murmured in surprise. Reiner narrowed his eyes, but he didn't stop his attack. His tentacles lashed out and ravaged the entire area where Samael had been, the brutal impact displacing the air and blowing away the smoke. But when the dust settled, Samael was gone. Confusion spread across the battlefield. Even the audience in the stands whispered amongst themselves, craning their necks to see where the ace had disappeared. Reiner frowned. Then, his gaze flickered downward. And that's when he saw it, a deep crack in the ground. All of a sudden, he realized something, but now it was too late. Behind Leon, Leora Glade stood hunched over, panting from exhaustion, drained from healing her allies. And behind her still, the earth split open. Thack! The crack widened, and the faint sound of earth rumbling made Leora's breath hitch as she spun. Only for a hand to clamp around her face. Gasps rippled through the crowd as they turned to see Samael emerging from the crack in the ground and grabbing Leora's skull in a firm grip. Then, without hesitation, he lifted her off her feet and slammed her down. Bomb! The impact reverberated through the immediate area. But before anyone could react, he yanked her head up one more time and slammed it down again. Concrete cracked and Leora's body went limp, a wound splitting open in her head as blood pooled under her. The healer was out. Leora! Leon's panicked voice rang out. He barely hesitated before pointing his finger at Samael, a bolt of lightning crackling to life. But Samael had already moved. The moment the lightning shot toward him, he sidestepped, then dashed forward. Leon fired another bolt, but Samael dodged it again. He wasn't fast enough to outrun lightning. But he didn't need to be. He was fast enough to predict where Leon would aim. He moved before the attack even came. Leon's eyes widened. Panic flashed across his face as he scrambled to summon a defensive card. But he was too slow. Samael's fist, still coated in a thick concrete gauntlet, crashed into Leon's face with the force of a battering ram. Crack! Leon's jaw dislocated instantly. His body flung backward and landed in a crumpled heap, unmoving. And he wasn't going to move again for a long time either. The battlefield fell silent for a split second. Then, what the? No way! It couldn't be. Shock spread through the spectators, as well as the remaining participants. The leader of the Commoner faction, one of the strongest cadets on the battlefield, had fallen. With 2 more down, that made 4 eliminated in total. Now 6 more to go. 148. Ha-ah, ha-ah, ha-ah. Samael panted, still on his knees. His flushed face was drenched in sweat. He felt lightheaded as every time he took a ragged breath, a sharp burning pain throbbed in his side. He was sure at least one of his ribs was fractured. It hurt. His torso hurt so much that his legs trembled when he tried to stand. That last attack from Reiner had really done a number on him. Those tentacles were fast and deceptively strong, each swing packing enough force to crush a car. Without steel hide, he had to be careful not to let them hit him again. If not for his special essence circulation technique that had already strengthened his body so much, he might have already been down for the count. Gritting his teeth, he pushed himself back onto his feet, enduring the bone-deep ache in his ribs and adjusting his stance. Pain, after all, was nothing new to him. He had been in plenty of street fights all his teen life, fights where there were no rules, no mercy, no regard for safety. He had both used and been subjected to unrestrained violence for as long as he could remember. A broken bone or two didn't faze him anymore. He didn't care about getting hurt as long as his enemy suffered more. His clan's martial arts tutors had tried to drill proper technique into him, scolding him for his reckless, self-destructive mentality. They tried to teach him self-preservation, an instinct that should come naturally to any fighter, but he never learned it. He just couldn't. To him, gain or loss didn't matter in a fight. What mattered was victory and defeat. If he left a fight crippled but his opponent couldn't walk either, then that was a satisfactory outcome. If he had to sacrifice his arms, his legs, his body, just for a chance to truly hurt his enemy, then that was fine with him. Because in his eyes, to fight is to kill and everything else is just decoration. If you strip away honor, tactic, and pride, combat at its core is just the act of ending lives before yours is taken. That was the first lesson and last lesson he learned from his father when he was a kid. And it had shaped his thought process ever since. Kuaa, ag. Samael coughed violently, spitting out a few drops of blood. Then, his bloodied red lips curled into a savage, vicious grin. In the horrified silence that filled the arena, his opponents, at least the ones still standing, stared at him. For the first time since this battle started, they looked visibly hesitant. They still had the number advantage on him. He was clearly injured and hurt. Yet, for some reason, they were now not so sure that they were easily going to win this. Samael met their gazes with nothing but pure arrogance. Then, slowly, he raised a hand and pointed at them, one by one. And with that same blood-stained smirk, he curled his fingers, wordlessly beckoning them forward. As if taunting them, daring them to come at him. And they did. Their expressions twisted, some with renewed determination, others with burning rage. Bong! The first to move was their one remaining long-ranged fighter, the sharpshooter, Erwin Holt. He aimed for Samael's leg and fired. He ideally wanted to go for a headshot, but he knew better. As Erwin had come to learn today, the golden-haired ace's instincts were unnatural. Erwin could predict an opponent's movements for the next 3 seconds, but his predictions were just that, predictions. And predictions could change. His ability worked best when his targets were unaware of him. Because the moment they noticed him, they would react. And their reactions would alter his predictions. It was similar to how observing a wild animal changes its behavior. Once aware of being watched, it no longer acts predictably. And Samael Kaiser Theosbane, well, his spatial awareness was outright absurd. He always kept track of Erwin's movements, never letting him line up a clean shot. It was frustrating. No matter how heated the battle got, he would always keep his attention split on Erwin. So when Erwin finally got a clear line of sight, he didn't take unnecessary risks. Ahead was too small of a target. Too easy to move out of the way. But a body shot was different. Even if it didn't take Samael out, it would slow him down, giving his allies the opening they needed to finish the job. And that was exactly what happened. For just a split second, Samael's focus wavered. And that was all Erwin needed to fire a bullet. Although Samael reacted fast, a fraction of a second before the gunshot echoed, he was still too slow to get out of the way completely. He threw himself to the side, and the bullet that was meant to hit his knee struck his thigh instead, piercing flesh and lodging deep into muscle. Arg! He gritted his teeth as he hit the ground on a roll and glanced up to see the rest of his opponents charging in from all directions. Okay, this was getting troublesome. It was finally time he stopped holding back. Yes, honestly, he hadn't been going all out. From the very start, he could have manipulated the terrain in such a way that could have isolated his enemies. Then, he could have picked them off one by one. However, that would have been too much work. He had figured he could handle them without going that far. But clearly, he had underestimated them. Fine then, he muttered to himself and firmly pressed his palms against the ground. Calum and Doran, both of whom knew firsthand just how dangerous Samael was when given the chance to manipulate the terrain, rushed forward as fast as they could, desperate to stop him. But they were just a couple of seconds too late. By the time Calum was anywhere near him, it was already too late. Samael's transmutation was complete. In the next moment, the ground shifted. First, within a 13 to 15 meter radius around Samael, the solid stone floor rippled, turning almost fluid like the surface of disturbed water. Then, without warning, it erupted. Jagged spikes, massive logs, and towering obelisks shot up from the ground at chaotic angles. Even as the first set formed, more burst forth, branching outward like growing concrete vines, sprouting new spikes and protrusions in erratic, unpredictable patterns. In the span of a few heartbeats, the battlefield transformed into a twisted jungle of concrete. Stone protrusions sprawled across the arena, wild and untamed, with Samael standing at its center. Calum was hit by one of the erupting spikes. He managed to block its sharp, pointed edge with the flat of his blade, but the sheer force behind it still threw him back in the air. Doran darted forward before Calum's body even hit the ground, menacingly swinging his massive mace to destroy any incoming spikes in his path. Stone shards rained down as he obliterated any jagged protrusions before they could impale him. But Samael wasn't done. The moment Doran stepped closer, another set of obelisks burst forth, twisting unnaturally like living creatures. The terrain shifted beneath his feet, throwing him off balance. TCH. Doran cursed inwardly and forcefully slammed his foot down to steady himself. He swung his mace again, smashing through another wave of spikes. He barely managed to regain his footing again when Samael suddenly closed the distance between them in the blink of an eye. But instead of attacking Doran directly, his hand reached toward the massive mace. Doran's eyes widened. He instantly realized Samael was trying to destroy his weapon with his matter control, so he yanked it out of the golden-haired boy's reach and jumped back. However, just then, a sharp glint flashed in Samael's eyes as two cards materialized over his shoulder, Vortex Pull and Barrier Breaker. He activated Vortex Pull first, creating a powerful localized pull around him, drawing everything within 5 meters toward him like an unseen gravitational field. Doran felt it immediately, a sharp tug yanking him toward Samael like iron nails to a magnet. But he was too heavy, his body refused to budge. He slammed his feet down harder, resisting the pull with sheer brute strength. But then, his item card, one that had given his mace its form, flew away straight into Samael's waiting hand. Before Doran could react, Samael crushed the card. His weapon started dissolving into a swirling rain of light sparks. Doran barely had time to process what had happened before Samael lunged forward. With nothing left to defend himself, Doran swung at him with his bare fists, but Samael was already too close. The golden-haired boy jumped high, driving his knee straight into Doran's face. A wet crunch echoed. Blood splattered across Samael's shin as Doran staggered, dazed, his balance faltering. But Samael still didn't let go. He placed his other knee on Doran's shoulder and practically mounted him. Then, using the full force of Barrier Breaker, he bashed a fist down into Doran's face, breaking his nose with devastating force. More blood spurted as Doran's vision blurred. His massive frame swayed, then collapsed back to the ground. Samael jumped off him as he fell and landed lightly. 149. After dealing with Doran's Stormwatch, Samael transmuted a kite shield from the concrete, held it firmly in his left hand, and summoned a card, Flash Step. He looked up to see two figures standing at the far edge of the battlefield. One of them was a tall, dark-haired man with a sniper rifle in hand. The other was a short girl with pink hair. Erwin and Scylla, one a deadly sharpshooter, the other a strategist capable of linking her allies' minds telepathically. And right now, taking out Scylla was his priority. That girl had not contributed much by fighting directly, yet because of her, the enemy's coordination was seamless. Every attack they threw at him flowed smoothly into the next, every plan they had was executed with near-perfect synergy. If he wanted to disrupt their rhythm, she had to go. He should have taken her out first. But there had been too many distractions before. Too many moving pieces. Not anymore. Samael jumped on top of a stone spike nearby, then took a single step forward. Phew. And as soon as he did that, he vanished. An instant later, he reappeared atop another spike, only to take a step forward and vanish again. No, he wasn't vanishing. He was moving at such great speed due to Flash Step that his figure blinked and blurred out of view as he dashed across the battlefield by jumping from one stone protrusion to the next. His movements were absurdly fast and erratic, making it nearly impossible for Erwin to track. The sharpshooter fired several shots, but none of the bullets found their mark. Every time Samael's feet touched the surface, he vanished into thin air, only to reappear elsewhere before the bullets could even graze him. He was closing in fast, and Erwin was starting to panic, until a flailing tentacle lurched toward him from the side. It snapped through the air with terrifying speed, giving Samael not even a full second to raise his kite shield in an attempt to block the blow. Crack! The impact obliterated half the shield and sent him flying. He plummeted like a meteor and hit the ground hard. The impact sent a jolt of pain tearing through his body as he tumbled across the rough terrain before colliding into an erupted stone obelisk and coming to a halt. The shield had blocked the blow before breaking, but it hadn't done much to cushion the impact. Coughing, he pushed himself to his feet, and felt someone coming in from behind him. He turned just in time to see a sword being thrust toward his chest. His muscles tensed. There was no time to dodge completely. So instead, he bent his knees slightly and tilted back at an awkward angle, raising his right arm to protect his face. SCHLK. The blade sank deep into his forearm, cutting through flesh as blood spilled onto the ground. Calum Ardent grinned, savoring the moment. Finally, he had driven his sword into his most hated enemy. Then, he activated his origin card. A burning sensation instantly ignited in Samael's wound where Calum's sword was still lodged. It was as if molten rock had been pressed against his forearm, searing through flesh and bone. The pain was instant and excruciating, spreading through his veins like wildfire. Arg! A pained grunt escaped Samael's lips as he tried to counterattack, only to sense another threat. To his left, he saw Vayna Rosen, closing in on him, the girl who could turn invisible in the shadows. Now that the battlefield transformed into a concrete jungle, full of towering stone pillars and jagged spikes, and the sun had almost dipped below the horizon, long stretches of darkness were strewn across the arena's ground, giving her an endless number of places to hide. From one of those shadows, she lunged forth. Her eyes, as dark as her hair, locked onto him and her dagger zoomed toward his face. Samael reacted fast by whipping his broken kite shield up to cover his face and neck. But Vayna was faster. At the last second, she dropped low and slid beneath him in one fluid motion. SCHLK. Her sharp blade flashed and carved a deep crimson line across his left calf. She had aimed to sever the tendons behind his knee, but Samael somehow twisted his leg at the very last second to take the cut on his upper calf instead. Still, the pain was enough to make his leg buckle. He collapsed onto one knee, breathing raggedly, as Calum yanked his sword free from Samael's arm, driving him further to the ground. Then, while Samael was on all fours on the ground, Calum raised his sword high overhead and swung. It was a merciless downward slash akin to a guillotine strike aimed straight for the golden boy's neck. Tom! But just as Calum's blade was about to make contact, a concrete log burst out from the ground to shield Samael's neck and intercepted the blade. The ace rolled away before Calum could recover, already scrambling to his feet. Whoosh! And that was when he saw a dark-haired girl lashing at him again. They really were not giving him a chance to breathe. Vayna shot out from the shadows once more, dagger gleaming under the dying light as she slashed across his back. Samael gritted his teeth, turning around to grab the shadow assassin. But she was already gone, her figure swallowed whole by the shadows. Calum took the opening without hesitation by rushing in and swinging his sword in a wide arc. Samael cursed under his breath and threw up his shield hand to catch the blade against the reinforced surface. Before Calum could pull back, Samael took a half step forward and gripped the blade with his free hand. Calum's eyes widened. He tried to free his sword, but Samael's grip was ironclad. Even as the sword's edge dug into his palm and drew blood, even as the wound inflicted by Calum's blade burned so much, Samael did not let go. And in under a second, tham! The sword shattered into countless metallic shards, slowly dissolving into shimmering particles of light. Calum didn't have much time to process his loss before rage overtook him. He threw the disintegrating hilt aside and launched himself at Samael with his fists. A sharp hook smashed into Samael's jaw, snapping his head back. Before the youngest Theosbane could regain his footing, an uppercut crashed into his chin, rattling his skull. Stumbling back, Samael barely managed to keep his balance when, Koch! Vayna struck from the shadows one more time and backstabbed him, plunging her vicious dagger deep into his flesh. Tisk! She clicked her tongue as her blade bit into his shoulder blade. She had aimed for his spine, his kidney at the very least, but Samael had shifted just enough to take the hit somewhere less vital. This was getting frustrating now. Why couldn't they catch him off guard? Throughout the entire fight, he hadn't made a single mistake. Every attack he could avoid, he dodged. What he couldn't, he tanked. And if he had no other choice, he took the hit where it hurt least. They knew he was battle-hardened, but this much. And the worst part was that despite the blood, despite the pain and the relentless assault they were putting him through, Samael Kaiser Theosbane, that guy still had that damn smirk plastered on his face. Vayna gnashed her teeth. She had fought many people since her awakening and had seen mad people who barely flinched at pain. But this was different. It was as if this guy was enjoying it. He was enjoying the thrill of the battle. A cold chill crawled up her spine as Vayna twisted the blade deeper into his shoulder and hissed in his ear, "Just stay down, you fucking monster." For a brief moment, Samael remained still, giving Calum just enough time to connect a devastating roundhouse kick with his temple. His head snapped to the side again, but when Calum tried to follow up with a straight punch aimed at his face, Samael moved his head away and seized Calum's arm with both his hands. Without a second's delay, the ace yanked the vindictive swordsman in and slammed his forehead into Calum's nose with a skull-caving headbutt. Calum staggered, concussed, swaying on unsteady feet. That gave Samael just enough time to spin toward Vayna. But she had already jumped out of his reach, leaving her dagger still embedded in his back. All Samael saw was her stepping into the shadows again. "Not this time, you bitch," Samael growled, raising a bloodied palm as vortex pull activated. Vayna's figure had almost faded into the darkness when suddenly, everything within 5 meters of Samael was tugged toward him like he was the center of a violent gravitational pull. "Huh," Vayna yelped as her body was yanked forward against her will. Since her dagger was still plunged into Samael's back, she was bare-handed. She tried to summon another weapon, but it was too late. The moment she was within range, Samael's hand shot out and closed around her throat. Using her momentum, he whirled and chokeslammed her into the concrete terrain below with a force that sent a net of cracks across the ground. Kuaa! Vayna's vision turned black for a heartbeat. The breath in her lungs was forcefully knocked out. But Samael wasn't done. Hauling her up like a broken ragdoll, he twisted and slammed her straight into one of the nearby spikes. The impact left deep fissures in the stony surface. With that, she was down. And when Calum, after shaking off the dizziness, rushed forward once more, Samael unceremoniously threw Vayna's limp body at him. Wide-eyed and startled, Calum instinctively tried to catch her, but the force knocked him back when she hit him, sending them both tumbling into a heap. He groaned and shoved her body aside, trying to push himself up, only to look up and see a flaming arrow streaking toward him. Still on his knees, the poor boy could only cross his arms over his chest before the fiery projectile struck him like a missile. Boom! A bright explosion tore through the battlefield, sending flames licking across the stone. The shockwave that followed outward kicked up dust and debris. When the smoke cleared, Calum was on his back, his combat vest charred and steam rising from his body. There were countless second-degree burn marks across his arms and torso, and with that, he was also down. 150. Phew, Samael exhaled weakly after eliminating 2 more opponents. With that, only 3 more remained. Reiner Tovik, the commoner faction leader. Erwin Holt, the sharpshooter. And Silan Mordain, the strategist. Ironically, despite the noble faction claiming that Samael only had the title of ace because he never faced them, they were the first ones to be eliminated. Right now, only the commoners remained standing. Medics and faculty members rushed in, whisking away the fallen cadets in an instant to begin their treatments. Samael straightened up, feeling the burning pain in his forearm and palms from the wounds inflicted by Calum's sword. Those wounds would continue to burn until fully healed because of his power. His left calf had a deep gash, so he couldn't put all his weight on that leg. Moreover, he was bleeding profusely from several places like the gaping stab wounds on his forearm and shoulder or the deep hashes on his back and calf, and his chest ached with every breath he took. But it was still less damage than he expected. Thwam! The arena suddenly trembled as if hit by an earthquake. Samael looked up and saw Reiner obliterating the concrete jungle he had constructed. The towering spikes, pillars, and obelisks that he erected to provide cover and isolate his enemies were all reduced to rubble by countless monstrous sweeps of Reiner's massive tentacles. Dust choked the air. Samael tensed a little. He had used the terrain to keep Reiner at bay, rendering him unable to use his tentacles effectively by trapping him in that clustered concrete jungle. The rocky protrusions also obstructed Erwin's line of sight. But now, with the battlefield mostly flattened, his advantage had ended. And Reiner wasted no time capitalizing on that. 2 tentacles lashed toward the golden-haired ace from opposite angles. Samael twisted away and dodged the first one, only for the second one to come barreling into his side with bone-crushing force. A sharp crack echoed through his body. Pain exploded across his ribs as he was hurled backward, crashing into a half-toppled pillar behind him. The impact sent another wave of agony through him, and before he could catch his breath, the thick, sinewy appendage pressed him against the pillar, pinning him in place. Samael coughed a mouthful of blood, feeling as if he was run over by a car. He took a shaky breath and conjured a flame arrow in his grasp. With a sharp inhale, he hurled it at the tentacle constricting him. The arrow struck true, detonating on impact with a deafening blast. Flesh sizzled and the smell of burnt sinew filled the air as the tentacle recoiled with a violent spasm. Freed, Samael staggered forward, but before he could properly regain his footing. Bong! A bullet tore through his left calf. His leg buckled, and he barely caught himself on one knee before gritting his teeth to stifle a pained hiss. Irwin, that damn sharpshooter had been waiting for even the slightest opening. And when he found one, when even the slightest area of Samael's body got out of the cover, he shot him. Samael sighed, as if he was almost bored instead of concerned, then forced himself to move, launching into a sharp roll as more tentacles came raining down where he had just been. He dove behind a half-broken concrete log, and not even a second later. Thwoom! The log exploded into fragments as Rainer's tentacles smashed through it, sending debris flying in all directions. But when the log fell, Samael was nowhere to be seen. He wasn't behind it. He was already gone. Rainer frowned. His eyes darted around for a second before finally spotting a deep hole in the ground. His heart pounded as realization dawned. The memory of how Samael had eliminated that healer girl, Leora, replayed in his mind. He immediately understood what happened. Using his innate power, Samael had gone underground. Again, Rainer went on high alert and felt the ground beneath him rumble violently. Rainer realized what Samael's plan was. Since he was strictly a mid-range fighter, Rainer had a few weaknesses like any awakened, one of them being extreme close-quarter combat. His tentacles, monstrous as they were too long to react properly if an enemy got within arm's reach. A swordsman pressing in could render them useless, just like how a spear was near impossible to swing if the opponent was already inside your guard. Which meant, Samael wanted to get close and personal with Rainer. He was going to come out of the ground from right under Rainer. It was already too late to summon a card, so Rainer decided to fall back to safety instead. The tentacles on his back dug into the ground far behind him and lifted him off in the air to move him, like an octopus walking on land. But the moment his feet left the ground, the very earth below him erupted. Not one, not five, but a dozen jagged spikes shot up like the fangs of some ravenous beast. Rainer only had the time to widen his eyes before one of the spikes punched clean through his left-hand tentacle, pinning it in place like a writhing insect on a needle. Two more impaled his right tentacle, spearing straight through the sinewy flesh. A fourth spike hurtled toward his lower torso. Instinct took over and one of the tentacles on his back shot forward on its own, curling around him to shield his body. It took the hit instead, and the stone spike stabbed it with a sickening crunch. Rainer stifled an agonized scream. Only one of his tentacles remained free. The rest of them were now skewered like squid meat on a barbecue stick, thrashing uselessly as he dangled helplessly in the air. And that was when the earth split opened right in front of his eyes. Samael burst out with a fire arrow in hand, his golden hair matted with dust and sweat. His eyes burned with something dangerously close to amusement. It was then that Rainer realized the truth. Samael had never intended to attack from directly beneath him. He only made him think that. The real trap had been laid the moment Rainer jumped back. Why? Because in midair, with two of his tentacles occupied moving him, Rainer couldn't retaliate fast enough when the spikes impaled his limbs one after another. Samael had ensured that by the time it was over, Rainer would be left hanging, skewered, helpless, and unable to fight back. If he were on the ground, he could have at least dismissed his origin card and retreated to recover. But if he tried to undo his partial transformation now, he would only fall down and be defenseless against any follow-up attack Samael might throw his way. From the start, this hadn't been an attack. It had been a checkmate. Even as he realized that, it was too late. Rainer could only wrench his one free tentacle forward in a desperate attempt to block the incoming fiery projectile. Boom! The flame arrow struck true. A deafening explosion ripped through the air, heat washing over Rainer in a scorching wave. The blast tore through his tentacle, reducing chunks of it to blackened, smoldering stumps. Bits of charred flesh and burned sinew rained down like grisly confetti. Ag! Rainer couldn't hold his scream anymore. The sound that clawed out of his throat was raw, guttural, more animal than human. And that was all he could do when another fire arrow connected with his chest, detonating upon impact. Boom! Then another. Boom! The world blurred into pain. Smoke rose from his body as his origin card disintegrated into light particles that were absorbed by his body, returning to his soul. The last of his tentacles retreated, shrinking back into his flesh. Two of them reformed into his arms, scorched, trembling, and barely functional, just as his battered body plummeted back to the ground. He hit the dirt in a heap, limbs limp, eyes rolling back. Unconscious. Burned. Defeated. The leader of the commoner faction had fallen.